Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Erik Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's episode 3, and we're going to talk about Deno.
What? We don't talk about Deno-no-no-no. But actually, we are. We're going to talk about Deno. Now, we're apologize because that song is going to be stuck in your head now for the rest of the day. Now, if you've got kids, you probably immediately recognize what that is from. Now, if you don't have kids and you've never seen Encanto, the Disney movie, well, you should go see it. Yep, go see it.
Okay. Yeah, that will be stuck in your head forever. Kind of like Magical Mr. Mistopheles from Cats.
I'll see it.
Don't go watch Cats.
I don't know that one, and I've not seen Cats, and I don't think I have any desire to see Cats based on what I know.
It's not good.
Nice. Well, you've got a little bit of some cool news to share.
Yeah, so I got some really great news. I'm going to be at NDC Oslo this year in May. I'm going to be talking about how to make your JavaScript blazingly fast, lessons from making a game engine. So I have a lot of tips to share. I'm going really deep. I'm going as far as like, how does JavaScript actually run in like V8? Like, how does the JIT work? So I'm really digging in deep. So hopefully that'll be a fun show. Yeah. And then another thing that I'm doing, because I have an RSI injury in my hands, I'm switching to NeoVim. And that takes about 2 months of hard work to switch to NeoVim and 2 months of very slow programming. But now I'm getting really fast. I started in December roughly, and my hands are feeling a lot better.
Okay.
Next up is probably a new keyboard.
So you're becoming a fan now, you would say.
I've been converted, and you fall into another classic developer trap of futzing with your NeoVim config instead of actually doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Hey, do you remember that game that teaches you Vim shortcuts? Did you use that, or you just went from scratch, just each day by day?
Yeah, I did that in the beginning to get used to the Vim motions, and I'll post that. I can't remember off the top of my dome what the name of the game was, but I'll post that in the show notes, what that game was. But Primogen has a Vim Be Good game to help you with the Vim motions as well. And then Vim comes with a Vim tutor, which is also pretty good. It's just text-based. You follow the instructions and it teaches you all of the ins and outs of Vim.
That's cool. I have not got into NeoVim at all. I'm still a Luddite and use Visual Studio Code, but now you can say that you're elite hacker.
It makes you go a lot faster.
That's cool.
But you got to suffer through 2 months of very slow.
Yeah, probably like any kind of skill. It takes some skill building to get up there. But then once you do, then can increase your productivity quite a bit.
Yeah. So what's going on with you?
So I'm working on 2 courses right now for Pluralsight. One is personal AI agents, which is a little bit different for me in that it targets non-technical people, which is also a challenge. And the fact that it's a short course, it's only supposed to be like 15 to 20 minutes long. So it's more like a tutorial type of video type deal. But it's kind of interesting. So I'm building a couple agents to showcase what are they good for, how to think about them, what are they not good for, I think is one of the most important parts. What do you not delegate tasks out to them for? So I'll be talking about that.
Oh, yes. Balance my checkbook, please. Drain.
Yeah, don't do that. For that, I got like a new camera set up, new lens, set that up this last week. It's looking a lot better. It's actually like, I'm still using the same camera I've always done, but I got a new lens for it, which has better aperture and better focal distance. So it's better for close-up video work. So it's going to look much more like a pro YouTube video type of deal. So that's kind of cool. I'm excited about that. And then I'm also almost done with the first module of my other course, which is a 2-hour course. And that one is on .NET MAUI testing and distribution. So fun fact, I used to have a app for Windows Phone. It's called Bowling Calculator. So there's a bowling place nearby here where you can go, but they don't give you a screen or anything to calculate your score. They just give you a pen and paper, right? And you've been there, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to know how to calculate bowling scores, and that can be fun. But if you are not inclined to do that, this app will do it for you. That's why I originally built it. So it was published to the Windows Phone Store. That bet did not work out, but it was open source. And so I've just ported it over to .NET MAUI. It will also be open source. And it's like a production grade sample. So it's got MVVM. It's using Event Aggregator, these patterns. And it's going to be showcasing the different ways to test your .NET MAUI app. And then I'll be walking through how to ship it, like on Google Play and Apple App Store. So I think it'll be a good course. So I'm wrapping up the first module this week.
I'm very interested in that because that distribution piece is very hard to get right.
It's harder. It's harder than it sounds. I mean, you would think that it would be easy, but it's not. So I'll be going into those details. Other than that, personally over the weekend, the weather was better. So remember last week it was like -18. Well, it was more like 30 this week. So we went to a cool thing on Lake Harriet, which is one of the bigger lakes by us, where it's fully iced over, and they had a art shanty projects event. So you could go out onto the ice, and all these artists had these like little ice houses set up, and you can go in them, and they do different. There's little activities you can do. We went into the cat one, and I think my kids were expecting to like see some cats, but no. The idea was that you act like a cat in the little shanty. So they had scratching posts set up. They had like things that you could knock over. So anyway, they had a little bit of fun with that. The wind over the lake it was intense. So we didn't stay too long, but it was pretty cool. So if you're in Minnesota, you should definitely go check that out. I think it goes for a few weeks.
Awesome. Moving on to the news this week in TypeScript. Bun 1.2 was dropped, and they produced a really awesome video, kind of in the style of the recent frameworks with a high production value video. Definitely recommend checking it out. They are touting a drop-in replacement of the Node API. They are saying in their blog post that they pass over 90% of the Node.js tests with Bun. So that's very interesting. And you might be asking like, oh, whoa, like how does that compare to Deno? And it's similar. I'd say Deno is doing, if you look at their docs, they have fully supported Node modules, 20 of the 44, completely fully supported. And then they have partial support, 17 out of the 44, and then no support for 7 out of the 44, according to their docs at the time of this recording. I think the distinction there is hard to draw because it's apples and oranges. We're talking about the tests suite versus like supported modules. So Bun is on the warpath to support Node.js as a drop-in replacement. So I think you can count on them being that, and that's part of their goal. And Deno 2, likewise, is part of their 2x like strategy, has like, softened their stance and opened up to Node. Now, I think the things to keep in mind is they are not going to support things that they have a better solution for. So 2 of those unsupported modules, SQLite, for example, they have their own SQLite library. So they're going to push you to that. And I'd argue it's probably better. And same with WASI. They have their own WebAssembly stuff. So they're going to probably push you to that.
Okay.
And like the Node WASI module. And then there's a few other Node modules that are just straight up deprecated. So I don't think it's super clear. Like if you were to say, hey, does Deno have more support or does Bun? I'd say they're both aiming for more support. So I would test it and see if it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
But Bun is looking pretty promising, looking pretty good. And this approach of them using the Node.js test suite, I think is a very, very powerful one.
So I think a beginner question might be like for someone like me who has not used Bun, I've heard of it and I've seen the cute little, what is it? Cream
Dumpling.
Dumpling? Yes, thank you. Dumpling. What is Bun exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's in the same runtime competitor space as Deno and maybe some of these other smaller ones. And I'm struggling to remember, but I'd say Deno and Bun are very similar in that they're both aiming for, TypeScript support out of the box. They're aiming for speed. Bun notably is not built on V8. It's using the WebKit JavaScript runtime, which is a JavaScript core, the creatively named JavaScript core. And then another thing that Bun is touting is they're doing a lot of native implementations of in JavaScript APIs. So a lot of their micro benchmarks are really impressive. But,
Cool.
buyer beware. Micro benchmarks aren't a production workload. So again, I would test and measure and see like if Bun works for you, but it's looking really cool.
Okay. So it's basically if I'm doing Node.js development, the aim of Bun is to be a drop-in replacement. So I could take my Node.js project, move it to Bun, and it should work.
In theory.
In theory.
That's what they advertise.
Cool. And then similar with Deno, that's also what they're trying to aim for, where you can just run Deno install in a Node.js project and it should just work. Okay, cool. So we got these two big runtimes in addition to Node.js. So I think we'll definitely do an episode on Bun at some point because I would love to learn more about it.
Yeah. Next up is Matt Pocock beat us to the punch on talking about erasable syntax in TypeScript. But he was talking about this on his YouTube channel. And I think he also has a blog post about it, if I'm not mistaken. But he's talking about this as like basically undoing maybe the missteps in the beginning and removing these features that should not have been in TypeScript to begin with, and only allowing the erasable TypeScript syntax only. Referencing kind of the types as comments proposal, this makes these things align very strongly. And I think it's in, one, it's in TypeScript's best interest to be erasable types, because then it just will work as part of maybe this types as comments proposal in TC39, which is the governing body for JavaScript.
Well, I think to remind people, so the erasable syntax only flag should be coming in 5.8 TypeScript. And we had covered Node's TypeScript support in Node 23.6. And so the idea here is that if you have a TypeScript project, you can introduce this config flag and it will throw a compiler error if you are using some of these features that are runtime omit features like enums, constructor, class properties, and those instantiated namespaces. Is that what it is? Yes.
You got it.
So it'll throw a compiler error, which means that you can enable this and then you can be sure that your project's going to be compatible with Node and then possibly these other runtimes that are just doing the type stripping. So one of the things that he says in the blog post is that these features really shouldn't have been in TypeScript to begin with. And I was just wondering what you thought of that.
I agree. Yeah. I think partially because I went and used them. I have to go and take them out for one reason or another. And enums are kind of weird too in terms of like typing, like that they behave oddly in the type system. So they feel kind of like a weird vestige.
Sure. I mean, I like the class property shortcut, as like a developer experience type of deal, but I can definitely see why this is a thing now. I was curious whether the team even had this in the strategy in the first place, right? Because if you think about the motivation to create TypeScript on top of JavaScript, you've got this new greenfield language. And then as a language designer, I could see like why you would want to add these like essentially macros, right, to the language to make it easier to do this type of stuff in JavaScript. So, but then at some point, and you actually mentioned it in the last episode, but at some point the TypeScript team saw that the landscape was evolving and they were like, you know what? We probably should not have we shouldn't have done this. We're going to take them out. We got to deprecate them. And now it's moving more towards TypeScript as a language that should interop better with JavaScript in these native environments. So these runtimes and also possibly the browser in the future with that types as comment proposal. So I could see why now is the time where they're introducing this and they're kind of stepping back from adding all these macros and stuff because it makes it harder for these compilers to transform the TypeScript into JavaScript.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think they learned their lesson when they implemented decorators and had to walk back decorators. And now decorators are still not approved. Stage 4. I think they're in stage 3 right now. But yeah, so that was a big oops. And I think they caught a lot of blowback for trying to push maybe the language outside of the standards body where it should be.
Yep. Cool. Well, next news item that is not directly related to TypeScript, but probably affects you is Tailwind 4 was released this past week, I think on January 22nd. Some of the highlights there, builds are 5 times faster, incremental builds are 100 times faster, and that is thanks to a new rewrite with their engine. So I guess they rewrote it to be high performance. They simplified the installation. So before, where you had to create some more config, and I think you also had to configure post CSS, you can now just configure it in one line of CSS, which is pretty cool. They've got a first class Vite plugin, Tailwind CSS/Vite. So you can just get that out of the box, whereas before you had to do, I think, some extra configuration. And they've also got built-in import support. So before, you used to have to install an additional post CSS plugin to import files in your CSS, but now they've just built it in with the new engine. So that's pretty cool. And then another really interesting thing is they've got CSS first configuration now. So you don't need a tailwind.config.js file anymore. You can create a tailwind.config.css file, I believe now, and you can define all your options there. So that's pretty cool. Taking it full circle is just all CSS now. So I think the big focus on 4 was to make things faster and then simplify the developer experience. That's pretty cool. Then lastly, Vitest 3 was released. And there's not a whole ton there. There was some breaking changes, I think, to some of their public APIs. They introduced a new public API surface, but they do have some new inline workspace configuration. Before, you had to create multiple workspace configuration files. Now you can do it in one file. And they've also got better support for multi-browser configuration, which could be useful for Excalibur if we need to run tests in multiple browsers. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking at that very closely as the next stage of our test suite because we use Karma and that is officially deprecated and makes me sad because we have thousands of tests.
Oh, man.
That'll be fun.
Okay, we've got one correction in a previous episode, and we want to make sure that when we are giving you news and updates, that we are as accurate as we can be. So if we say something and it's not accurate, we want to make sure that we go back and address that. So in episode 2, we were discussing Node 23's new TypeScript support and the article by Marco Ippolito. About 19 minutes in, I said that it uses SWC, but then I also said that both Node and Deno use TSC for transpilation. That is incorrect. So SWC takes care of transpilation, which means that Node does not use TSC at all. So thanks to Marco for that correction. And thank you, Marco, for actually listening to the episode. In fact, if you read the article, Marco discusses how even new minor versions of TSC can cause breaking changes, which is why Node didn't want to depend on it. And he goes on to provide several other good reasons TSC isn't included with Node.js. I remember reading that, but I wasn't even thinking about that when I compared the two. So that's definitely my fault, and I apologize. So if there are things that we say that aren't accurate, send it in. We are happy to make sure that people are well informed. All right, back to the show. TypeScript FM is sponsored by Excalibur.js, the friendly TypeScript game engine for the web. Like many of you, I got into computers because I loved video games and dreamed of making one, but game development always felt a bit intimidating. Instead, I built a career in web development, though that dream of making games never really went away. Then I met Erik, who showed me I could use my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to create games with just a bit of game design knowledge and the right engine. Excalibur.js makes game development approachable, offering everything you need to build 2D web games. Arcade physics, sprites, animations, input support, and integrations with tools like Tiled and Sprite. It's beginner-friendly, yet flexible enough to grow with you. Our team has published 10 games using Excalibur, all written in TypeScript. If you're a web developer looking to dip your toes into game dev or sharpen your TypeScript skills, give Excalibur.js a try at excalibur.js.com. Click the big tutorial button to start building your first game, Excalibur, a Flappy Bird clone. After that, join our friendly Discord community of web developers who love to help each other and share game dev tips.
So on to our main topic. We want to dive into Deno, and this is kind of going to be a big overview of Deno. So like if you're not familiar with Deno, this is kind of the episode to kind of get your feet wet with Deno. We're going to try to dive as deep as we can in the time that we have, but maybe we'll do a follow-up. And if you all have any questions or comments, we can revisit those in a later episode.
Yes. So do you want to just explain to me what is Deno? I've heard about Deno, but I don't know anything about it. Please explain.
Oh, well, we don't talk about Deno. No, we do talk about Deno. So Deno is created by Ryan Dahl, the original creator of Node.js. He was like, hey, I think we did it a little wrong, but it's too late to change Node. So he decided, okay, you know what we're going to do is we're going to make Deno, which is an anagram of Node. And I think it's the letters spelled in ascending order. So Deno and Node are an anagram. So if you didn't catch that, that's one thing. They got a cute little dinosaur logo. So, you can't go fault them for that. But the idea is that it's a TypeScript first, rewritten from the ground up, secure by default runtime for JavaScript at scale. So it's built in Rust. It uses the same V8 binding, or it uses V8 bindings, but it uses V8 as the same as the Node.js, but they built their own new library called Rusty V8. So if you would like, Rust bindings to V8, they built an open source library on GitHub. I think it's denoland/Rusty V8. It's also available as a crate. Again, V8 is the JavaScript runtime that powers Chrome. Super powerful. And we can get into why it's super good later, maybe if we have time. But V8's got a lot of interesting features that allow it to be very fast for JavaScript. And they really push the edge on speed. So,
and just to be clear, Node also uses the V8 bindings. Is that right?
Yeah, they use V8 bindings, but they use C++.
Okay.
So they have their own C++ bindings to V8. And Deno went and did their own thing in Rust. Since the whole Deno project is Rust-based, all from the ground up is built in Rust versus like Node being C++. Cool features of Deno. I think we talked about this a little bit in the previous episode, but they've really tuned the developer experience to be super good and super fast. So everything that you can possibly want is kind of integrated in their CLI in that tool chain. And it's like no nonsense, super fast. It does what you think it should do. And everything in Deno is kind of built around security and keeping packages from like either accessing environment variables, accessing the network, accessing the system, unless you give it permission to. So it should give you like a little bit more like, put your shoulders down versus like maybe like you npm install something and it decides it's going to go and, steal all the creds out of your environment variables or, scan your disk for .env files and, shoot them to a command and control server somewhere. Deno is great for that. And now with Deno 2, they have support for npm packages as well. So you can get that security against these maybe dubious npm packages you might be using. That same security applies. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about some of the common CLI commands that you run?
Totally.
Because last time you likened it to like the Go CLI, right? Because the Go CLI is very integrated with everything you need, to work on Go. And so similarly, Deno's CLI is integrated. You can just do everything related to Deno. So obviously I can cover the first few, but like Deno run is the way that you run scripts and modules. So you can pass it your index.ts and it'll run it. So that'd be just similar to saying like node index.ts, but in Deno, it's Deno run.indexts.
Yeah, now, it's not to be confused with like how you might do npm run and run task.
Yep.
There's a separate CLI command for that called Deno task, which allows you to run things in your Deno.json, which is kind of the analog to the package.json, except it allows you to declare dependencies.
Yep. And that's also a big difference between Node and Deno, where Node and npm are two different executables. But in Deno, the package management is just built into the Deno CLI. So that's why there's Deno run, which is to run a script, Deno task, which is the equivalent of npm run, where you're running a script in your config JSON file, and then Deno install, which is like npm install. to install a package. And similarly, there's also Deno uninstall and stuff like that to do package management. I think that the Deno tasks stuff is pretty interesting because there is a kind of a cool difference where in NPM scripts, it's hard to run multiple scripts together. But in Deno task, you can set it up so that there are dependencies on the tasks. And you can create something called a directed acyclic graph, a DAG. You want to explain that?
Yeah. It's kind of like fancy pants graph theory for graph that goes in one way and doesn't have any circles. So directed, meaning it's got a direction. Acyclic means no circles, and G for graph. So you can imagine each node in your graph here being a specific task. And then you could say like, okay, well, before I can run build, I need to copy this over here and I need to start a web server. And then you could maybe build up a list of tasks that way and build up a directed acyclic graph that way.
It kind of reminds me of Gulp and Grunt, which is what we used to use for Excalibur, the build system, to run all the scripts and stuff.
And before that, we used a makefile.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that.
No, we don't talk about makefiles. So, but with Deno task now, you can kind of do that similar thing where you can basically create dependencies between tasks. So that's pretty cool. Now, the other really nice thing, and Node recently added support for native test running, but Deno also has native test running through Deno test. And it works very similarly. Like I'm used to running tests in Jest, which is what I used to use. And then now I use Vitest. It's very similar. You can run Deno test. It will scan for test files, and it supports like the .test.ts suffix or _test suffix. And I think you can customize that. And then Deno has a built-in API in the SDK where you can declare your tests. And then you can import standard expect. We haven't talked about the standard library yet, but as part of the standard library, there's an assertions library that you can take a dependency on, and then you can do expect style BDD testing. And they also have like assert as well if you're sort of used to that. But I like the Jasmine style BDD assertions. Then we've got format, Deno FMT, Deno format, which is basically taking the place of prettier. So you don't need prettier. You don't need ESLint because Deno lint will lint your project. And you don't need TSC because Deno check will do your type checking. So you've got at least 4, tools that you would have had to have in Node.js to build your app. Jest or Vitest, Prettier, TSC, ESLint. Those are all just like built into Deno. And there's a lot more in that too.
The best part of that, I think, is the amount of time I've spent wrestling with getting all 4 of those tools to work together, like separately, is a pain in the butt. So like having it just built into the CLI is just a godsend.
Yep. Now there's a bunch of other extra Deno CLI commands too. I think you wanted to talk about serve, dock, and bench.
Yeah. So the Deno serve is kind of interesting. They have the built-in like server kind of configuration. And it's not exactly like running an HTTP server. You need to pass it a server TS file and it'll run that module. But I think you need to give it some exports and stuff.
Okay, so here's how I would explain it. You can think of it as like a Cloudflare worker. If you've ever used that, the way that you declare a Cloudflare worker, the way you build it is you basically do a default export and you export a fetch function, an async function. It receives the incoming HTTP request and then it just returns a response. So that's essentially what they've done with the serve command. So it's and I think that they did it because they also have Deno deploy, which is their serverless JavaScript runtime.
Right.
And I bet that that's how they serve those workers or that serverless code. So that's just built into the CLI. So in Node, where you'd have to import an HTTP server, you'd have to listen on a port and all that kind of stuff. It takes care of that boilerplate.
I see.
And you're just exporting a fetch function, essentially.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Deno doc is super great because now they have, if you've ever wrestled with TypeDoc or similar like documentation generation services, it's kind of hard and it is frustrating at times. But Deno doc is just built right in. It'll spit out documentation. You pointed at a TypeScript file and it'll just spit out the TypeDoc-ish style documentation. It's very slick.
The whole static site, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it is a whole static site. I pointed at Excalibur, but we have a bunch of cycles, which confused the imports in Deno, and we crashed Deno doc. But it works on a one file basis for us right now.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I wanted to point out that I have used a lot, and I use it just in my day-to-day, is Deno Bench, which is a built-in benchmarking tool for building like micro benchmarks. This is really great if you're like, okay, I want to know how this runs in V8. And you can go ahead and set up some like elaborate code, and then you can set up like critical sections. And I believe it's like begin end, and it'll measure that specific block of code in your bench. But it'll give you all the statistics and like the standard deviation, the average P99s. So you'll know how fast your code is running in V8. Super useful for me for game dev, because I'm looking at V8 a lot for like my primary target.
Cool.
And then making sure everything else can run fast too. But, working like this gives you a good idea. Like you can do little snippets of code and understand if something is going to be fast or slow.
That's super nice. Do you remember having to go, I think it was jsperf.com or something? It was that site where you go to, you could paste in multiple snippets, and then it would run it in the browser, so you could benchmark, browser performance and stuff. This is basically the same thing, but for server-side code or like local code on your machine. Sweet. So I mentioned a little bit about the standard library. So this is also kind of a unique thing about Deno, where it comes with an official set of standard libraries, and those libraries are prefixed with @std. There's probably some jokes in there about that, but that's available on JSR, which is their registry for packages. So the standard library is really nice. Like they've got stuff that replaces some common packages that you would use in Node, like Lodash. So when I was working on Advent of Code, I needed to work on some collections. And like, for example, I wanted to sum, a property on an array of objects, right? Well, yeah, I could do it using just native JavaScript with, map and reduce or whatever. But I also just use the standard collections package, and they have a sum of function, and equivalent to like Lodash's sum by or whatever. Also cool, they've got lots of other stuff too. If you poke around in the standard library, they've got a CSV parser. They've got path utilities. They have stuff with working with network and HTTP and all sorts of stuff. So things that are not part of like the Deno core API are part of the standard library. I think one thing that I was learning as I was going through Deno was where to look to find some of these APIs. Because, for example, I was a little bit confused because I thought that there would be a standard library for file system APIs, but actually it's part of the Deno like runtime object. So it's like Deno dot read file async or whatever. So that was a little bit confusing, but hopefully that'll just be cleaned up over time. But there's a set of APIs that are just built into the Deno API, and then there's these standard libraries that are separate. And then the sweet thing that I think you're most excited about as far as Deno goes is the ability to compile binaries.
Yes, I am very excited about the Deno compile command. And what this does is exactly what Kamran said, is it creates a standalone exe, a standalone binary that you can run. It'll also cross-compile for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And you can create like standalone command line apps. Super useful if you're building the tools and stuff and you want to distribute an exe to a friend or distribute it very easily. And they don't need to have Deno installed. They don't need to have Node installed. They don't have to have NPM installed or whatever. They just get this standalone exe with like a stripped down version of V8 embedded. So it's kind of like Electron, but better. It's like completely headless. So you get like a stripped down version of V8 and you get your program embedded together. You can do cool things like set your icon to your, project icon. You can embed resources in the binary. So what does that mean? You can put like files into the binary. Like I have a CSV file that I want in there. I want an image file that I want in there. I want some data in there that, is like my lookup. Maybe I could put a database in there. I imagine that's something that people would want to do, like embed a SQLite database in there, like for, some lookup type stuff. They support code signing. So you can actually like not get flagged by an antivirus or Windows or whatever, or you can distribute on Apple or wherever you need to go. Some really cool stuff. that we'll link in the show notes, there's a foreign function interface where you can compile like native libraries into your binary. So if you have some other native library that you want to use, and I'm kind of foreshadowing something cool that I'm going to have in the cool stuff later, but you can do really cool stuff like games with the foreign function interface and do like graphics and stuff. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but Deno compile is super cool. It's really great. Like if you want to like have your server exe, like for your process, you can just exe, distribute it, run it on some cloud. Bob's your uncle.
Well, and great for desktop CLIs. So like you can just package it as an exe. And then in our case, I think we're interested in the ability to distribute games. Like you can compile your TypeScript game using Deno compile into an exe that then you could put on Steam or whatever. So I think that's pretty cool. Oh. Now you mentioned that it's similar to Electron, but it is different. Like it's not like you get the web, it's not like a desktop app that gets shown. But I'm sure that there might be a framework with Deno that you can use that's Electron equivalent.
There totally is.
Nice. Do you know what it's called?
One of the members of my Discord did something last night, so I don't even remember what it's called.
That's cool.
They got a web view thing going with Deno compile, and It's super slick.
That's cool. We'll have to add that onto a cool stuff segment at some point. We'll take a look at that. We already sort of discussed some of the performance stuff. One thing I wanted to call out there specifically was the Deno blog has a post on AWS Lambda cold starts. And this is what Erik was talking about in I think the first episode of like one of the advantages I think of Deno is that since it is rewritten from the ground up, they can optimize different aspects of how they use V8. And I think that is shown in like the AWS Lambda cold starts benchmarks where it's the fastest cold start runtime that there is right now. So if you're interested in that and using it for serverless and stuff, you should definitely check that out. There's also a GitHub repo I will link to called denosaurs/bench. It essentially hits a whole bunch of Deno frameworks and Node and Bun against each other, and it benchmarks some of the like HTTP request type stuff, so you can see how many requests per second can they all handle, what's their request latency, and breaks down a lot of that. So you can definitely check that out. I think a couple quick things that we probably want to mention related to Deno. So like Deno, yes, is like it's the runtime, the TypeScript runtime, but also Deno does have a couple products or like tangential stuff in its ecosystem. So one of those is Deno Fresh, which is essentially a server-based HTTP framework. So it's, I guess, kind of like Express, or maybe more similar to like Next.js type of deal. But it's server rendered, so you can create a website that's rendered on the server, and it's using Deno behind the scenes. So I think that's pretty cool. And I've not really played with it, so I can't comment too much on it, and probably just deserves its own episode anyway. And then JSR, I think, is kind of one of the interesting things. If you're familiar with NPM, JSR is Deno's sort of alternative to NPM, but it's built to be TypeScript first and ESM first.
Yeah, and one cool thing about JSR that we should also mention is that it's completely open source. So like one thing that's maybe like you could knock NPM for is it's completely closed source code that runs the NPM registry. Now there's plenty of other products out there like Artifactory or Code Artifact in AWS that can host NPM packages, but the NPM registry proper is closed source software. So maybe one, check in the plus column for JSR is it's completely open source. You can run it locally. You could run your own JSR locally. Pretty slick.
That's nice. And it comes, since it is TypeScript first, it uses that built-in docs command to essentially include automatic API reference docs in JSR. So when you go view a package on JSR, if it's written in TypeScript, which most of them are, although it does mirror or support like NPM packages, you'll also be able to see the API docs right there. So you don't have to go to like a separate site, or for a lot of NPM packages, there's sometimes just no API docs at all. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And moving on is like, okay, so they have all these cool things. They're building all this cool stuff, open source. How do they make money? Well, I Deno is doing a serverless play or a hosting play. They have their integrated Deno deploy so that you can host your Deno programs, no fuss, straight to the cloud. I think, if anything, this is another aspect where they really win in that integrated DX. Everything is super slick. Everything is super simple. You can just deploy your stuff. Wham, bam, you're out there. Really easy. And there's probably a whole show on JSR and Deno deploy in here, but we'll definitely revisit Deno deploy in the future to talk about like what it's like to run something in Deno deploy. But it's pretty slick. It's their tagline is hassle-free. Yes, it is.
I think on that note, I wanted to just share quick some actual like in the field experience using Deno, because part of my 2025 goals was like, I want to learn Deno and I want to switch all my workloads over if I can. So like I've set up my MacBook so that there's no Node.js on it. It's all just Deno now. And then I used it for Advent of Code to solve 5 puzzles. And so I used it as an exercise to like get familiar with it. So I think just a short list of some of the biggest differences if you're coming from Node.js. One is that secure by default. And that just caught me multiple times where I'm like trying to run my puzzle. And because I call out to like an HTTP server, or more likely I'm reading from the file system, that requires read file permissions. So you have to pass that flag anytime you call like Deno run. And you can pass $A, which is like all, but you're just opening it up to everything, which unfortunately I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to do that as far as like it's convenient to do that, but it's not what I would recommend. But it is secure by default, which means that anytime you run a Deno program or Deno script, you have to be aware of what permissions it needs, and it will tell you. And so you can either interactively say, yes, right now, allow that permission, or no, don't allow it, or you can pass command line flags to enable those. Another big gotcha was because it is ESM first and native ESM, there's a little bit of nuance with the way that you import files. And you mentioned this, but normally with CommonJS, we've just been conditioned to import files without file extensions. So I can say, relative file, but I can just leave off the .js or the .ts. You can't do that with native ESM imports. So Deno does make you put the file extensions, but they do allow you to not do that through a flag called allow sloppy imports. The sloppy imports, though, you can tell that it's not what you're supposed to do. It's there for compatibility, backwards compatibility, because Deno compile doesn't even support sloppy imports. So if you're actually trying to build your Deno program natively, you just can't use sloppy imports. You have to use the file extension. And then the other thing that takes some getting used to is that if you are using type imports, where you import something from a TypeScript module, you just use it as a type. In like Webpack and things like that, it was fine to just do a regular import. But with Deno and now the Node 23 TypeScript support, you must use a type import. So any types that are only used as types need to be as type imports. You can't leave off that type keyword in the import. So those changes were like, I struggled through them a little bit. Like I kept having to like remind myself, okay, I had to do this. I will say that the errors were great. Like with Deno, they just told me, hey, you can't do sloppy import like that. You got to keep the file extension. So it's not like it just blew up. It did tell me what to do. And then I do think it's going to be somewhat helpful, because if you are going to be using the new Node 23 TypeScript support and onwards, you're going to have to do that anyway. Node 23 doesn't support sloppy imports with TypeScript, and you also have to use those type imports. So you're kind of going to be trained on doing that anyway.
It's the right way to do it. We're kind of unwinding some bad habits. It's also like part of the standard too. So it's kind of the way that we're going forward, as much as I don't like.
Yeah.
Not like having to give a file extension. Like that's kind of the way that we're going. And tooling will help us out here.
Tooling, yes. I was going to say that tooling helps. So one of the things that I learned right away was I installed the Visual Studio Code plugin for Deno, and that was super helpful. That adds the Deno language server. So it's not using the TypeScript language server that's built into VS Code. It's using its own Deno language server. And that was great. So that was able to import stuff pretty well.
Fun fact, there's also an MVim version of that. So you can run NeoVim with Deno language server.
Nice. That's good. That's good. Yep. I think people want to know that. But we already talked about testing. Workspaces was the only other cool call out there. At Target, we had a mono repo and it was kind of a pain to manage. We had to use a third-party tool, like a third-party package to manage the mono repo. In Deno, it's all just native. It's natively supports mono repos. Worked really well where you could just import from other packages from another local package without hardly any extra config. You can look at the GitHub repo where I shared my advent of code. There's a deno.json, I think, at the root, and you can just see how I configured the workspaces. It's super simple. So I was really happy with that. And then the last thing was that as I was working on advent of code, Deno came out with a new release. And so I was like, well, how do I update it? Well, you just run Deno upgrade and it updates itself. And that's it. It works
Super
great.
slick.
I think that the one question that I had that I don't have a good answer to yet is how that is going to work over time. Because right now we have Deno 2, but like what happens when we have Deno 3, Deno 4, Deno 5, and you've got older projects running Deno? How is that going to work? Is it going to be backwards compatible?
Actually, I have an answer for you.
Oh, you do?
You can use Deno upgrade to bounce between versions of Deno. So you can decide that, hey, I want to be on the RC. I want to be on a SHA. I want to be on a specific channel. So I can do Deno upgrade stable, Deno RC, Deno Canary.
Sweet.
Super slick. So they do have this in mind, and I don't know how far back you can go, but I think if you're working in relatively modern Deno, in their example here, they have 1x versions in there. So I assume you can bounce back to 1x if you so desire.
Awesome. Well, then that's another tool in the toolchain you don't need. Like with Node, I was using NVM and then I switched to using FNM, which is Rust based. I don't know what the F stands for, but fast node manager. I don't know. But that's what I used on Windows because it was a little bit more reliable. But with Deno, don't need a version manager, I guess. You can just use Deno upgrade. Awesome. I mean, what are you excited about for the future of Deno?
I think, well, one, their WebAssembly, we didn't even touch on this. Their WebAssembly stuff is really good. And it like smooths over some of the goofiness in the WebAssembly API. So that's one thing I'm really excited about, is to explore WebAssembly more in Deno. And then I'll tack on like foreign function interface because I'm working on a lot of native code lately. Mm-hmm. And being able to integrate that into Deno, I think is going to be really cool.
Sweet. I mean, I'm personally just excited for like the tighter integration between all these different tools. I mean, I've been really happy and like I will call it joyful. Like the developer experience is really good in Deno. It felt really good. I felt happy as I was using it. It didn't frustrate me because there wasn't any config that I really had to deal with. So I'm just kind of excited to see that evolve even more. So trying a different segment of the show called The Secrets of the Handbook, because we all know that developers don't read docs. And I don't know about you, Erik, but I have not read through the entire TypeScript handbook.
Nope.
Yeah. I've read a lot of it, but I've not read through all of it. And it, continuously evolves. So I thought it would be cool to call out something from the handbook that's maybe a little bit more obscure, that could be something cool that we haven't seen before, or something that we've used that was useful that other people might like. So I wanted to share from the TSConfig, there's a flag called extendedDiagnostics. If you enable this flag, it will print out the compile time for each of the files and modules in your project.
What?
Yeah, well, you might be wondering, why would you do this? So I actually used this at Target to speed up our monorepo build by at least 2 times. And the way that I did it is if you enable the extended diagnostics, it's going to spit out the compile times of the modules so you can diagnose what's taking so long. And I discovered that it was compiling types in the node modules directory, and it was spending too much time doing that. So I was able to enable a couple other flags like skip libcheck to speed up the build. And then I also excluded a few different things from our mono repo, and that sped it up quite a bit. So it used to take 2 minutes to do a full build of our mono repo, and I got it down to like 40 seconds or something like that, which is still ridiculous that it took so long, but it's much better than 2 minutes, right? So I would say use extended diagnostics to diagnose your build. Before you change any flags or anything like that, make sure you document what flags you're using and then like measure your baseline, like how much time does it take for you to do your build? Because sometimes when you tweak these config flags, it will make stuff not work. So you just want to be careful with that. But I think that's a really nice flag to know about. Some cool stuff. We've been talking about Deno all episode. One of the things that I used to do was use npx serve to serve a local folder so that I could was looking at a demo or wanted to host something real quick and just needed a static file server. So I created an alias to do the same thing in a single Deno command, just called serve. And it uses the HTTP server standard library to do that. It's in one line command that you can do. So I thought that was pretty cool.
The other cool thing, you probably heard a lot about me talking about foreign function interface, but the folks at Deno, there's a presentation from them about the building Flappy Bird in Deno compile by linking to like SDL, which is a common graphics and audio package for building games in C and C++. So they link to SDL using the foreign function interface in Deno. And by the way, the API is super nice. And I'm like drooling over it. And they made Flappy Bird in Deno with Deno compile. You should check it out. We'll have a link to the video in the show notes. It's really cool.
Awesome. Well, that was a long episode, so we're just going to say goodbye. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at kamranicus.com and Erik is at erikonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.